Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery. My wormery is just the corner of my basement where I run a bunch of worm composting trays. All these bins that you see, these all have worms living in them, and this is where I bring all my trash. Rather than dumping stuff into the garbage, I bring stuff down here, stuff that the worms will gladly eat. And the byproduct of all that activity is a really nice material, basically their manure, which I feed to my plants outside my garden. So the systems that I've got lined up today to feed are doing something a little different over here. In order to make some extra space, I've taken some of my systems that are sort of a one of two situation, systems that were launched on the same day. I've stacked them up just to give myself a little bit more room here to fit everything. When I launched off my newest bin, I felt like I was sort of out of space. So these two sister bins, or twin bins that you see here, labeled with ANC, which means African Nightcrawler. These are the systems that have been going for 88 days now. Fed 7 times, so today's feeding is going to be feeding number 8. And it's been 12 days since we last checked in, so I believe they're due. So we're going to get these systems up onto the bench, and we're going to get them fed. So let's get to work. To feed the worms today, I came equipped with a couple days worth of coffee, as well as 2 frozen pears that I cut in half. And I've also got my prepared bedding, which I just replenished. Can you guess which end of the bin is the fresh stuff versus which is the nice aged stuff? I think it's pretty obvious. Eventually this stuff will all get soaked because I do prepare that stuff with moisture, with water. But my prepared bedding isn't really nothing more than a bunch of shredded paper and cardboard mixed with leaves and then dampened and given some time to get nice and soft and primed for worm bin use. A lot of my systems have been kind of getting a little bit too damp for my liking. So what I've been doing in a good number of my systems is excluding the plastic coverings when I find things to get that way. But these systems are fairly new still, so there's still abundant quantities of fresh bedding materials, which I believe just by their nature have a tendency to be a lot more airy and less likely to get muddy and clumpy. So it seems unlikely that today we're going to have to take that approach here. It seems like we'll probably be seems like we'll be probably able to return the plastic coverings once we finish and help the systems maintain their moisture content. However, I'm prepared at any time to eliminate the plastic coverings and maybe just replace them with something that allows for a little bit more ventilation and evaporation. So we'll see. We'll see how things look in here when we're finished. We'll make the decision on how to cover things. So like you saw, these coffee filters were marking where we last fed, and even if the markings weren't there, I think, not sure if it's visible on the camera, but it is pretty obvious to see where that trench has developed, where the food's been depleted, how the material has sunken down and dropped in height where the worms have been busy eating the foods we gave them last time. And the stuff we put in here last time was mainly Brussels sprout leaves, and there were a few chunks of asparagus thrown in there too. In a couple of my other systems where I'd been feeding Brussels sprout leaves, it seemed to me like there was a fairly large quantity of leftovers, making me wonder why. In those other systems where the Brussels sprouts weren't really getting eaten as quickly as I'd hoped, I just had this hunch that maybe I did not freeze the foods before placing them into the worm bins. Here, I did place all their foods in frozen, as I'll be doing today. All the stuff that they're, well, not the coffee, but the pears are frozen. And to me, it does seem like frozen foods definitely have a tendency to break down much more quickly than stuff that is placed in without having been frozen first. So let's see here. We've got, okay, this is the seed out of a avocado. Both systems would have received an avocado at some point in the past, and I'm I'm always curious to see if I'm able to crack it in half yet, because if you ever handled one of these things, it's like a marble. It's really tough in the very beginning when it's still fresh. But after a few weeks in the worm bin, it does gradually soften up to the point where it breaks pretty readily. But this one's not yet at that stage. Perhaps the one that's in the other bin is. We'll see when we get there. So I've opened up a pretty good sized trench down in bin number 2. Let's make our way over to bin number 1, because when I'm doing these worm bin check-ins in this side-by-side fashion, I like to try to behave as if I'm working on a large bin here. So it would seem unusual if you were kind of excavating the feeding zone of a single large bin to stop halfway and just get on to doing something different. So I'm trying to adhere to this thinking that, hey, I'm not working on 2 bins, I'm working on 1 large bin, don't forget. But it does feel like I've got to reinforce that thinking in my mind, because it's a little bit unnatural and it doesn't seem to just happen unless I remind myself. So here, I think I remember even last time we gave this avocado pit a little squeeze and a whole bunch of juice came spewing out of it. So you saw how easily I was able to chip off a chunk of it. And at this stage, I'm pretty certain I'd be able to just break that thing up into little tiny bits. So I'm satisfied to just know that it is already at that stage. I'm not going to help it along any further. We'll just kind of check in on it in future visits and see how it's progressing. I'm just a curious type who likes to see how things break down on their own without my help. Sometimes I am curious to see how things like, you know, a really tough material like that will break down, or even a material that doesn't seem so tough, like a corn cob, for example. Sort of thing that you would almost expect to get eaten really quickly by the worms, somehow manages to take a really, really long time in the worm bins to break down. I mean, we're at the start of summer here, and in my region, when it comes to corn, corn is a summer food, as it is for most people, I believe. In my region, it's something I generally don't eat unless it's out of a can. Unless it's canned corn, you're probably not going to be seeing much corn around my house in the off season. You know, but come summertime, corn is a pretty common thing, because I really do like corn. And I still got corn cobs floating around in some of my older systems that dates back to even last summer. So corn cobs definitely take a long time. So I laid down a nice foundation of shredded paper cardboard mixed with leaves. Then I think we can start dropping in some of the old bedding bits. What I used last time was just some torn up paper plates, which I think these might be part of. And they did go in here as fairly large chunks of material. So the bedding stuff I don't mind helping along and tearing up to increase its surface area in the hopes that maybe it gets broken down a little bit more quickly. The sort of things I prefer to just allow nature to take its course are the food items generally. So I think before we plop in all the new stuff, I'm going to see about returning some of the old stuff back down into the feeding area, and in the process seeing if I can fragment some of the larger pieces. So I mean, these are paper plates that I just tore into maybe 3 or 4 pieces, so they did go in here pretty large, and to break them up a little bit like this, I believe, is probably a good idea to assist in the breakdown process. So I think we've laid in a nice foundation of bedding for today's feeding, onto which we're going to plop in today's yummy food portions. We've got pear frozen. Pear, I don't know. To me, it seemed like pear was actually a food that the worms would probably break down quite quickly, but when I placed pear into my outdoor worm bag, I did place it in without opening it up, so it was still an intact full pear, and it just seemed like it took forever. Well, no, I mean, it hasn't even gotten anywhere, basically, because I went in there the other day and it was almost untouched. It seemed like it had lost a little bit of mass, maybe just a little bit of liquid weight or liquid mass, but it was still almost an entire full pear, so not sure why it's taken so long. Oh yeah, let's not forget The other thing we wanted to drop into the feeding zones was the feeding zone indicators from last time, because even though these things are in good shape, we've got replacements, so we might as well supplement the bedding with these as well. So when we drop in the coffee, we're going to hang on to the filters and place them out on the top surface to indicate where we last fed. And this is maybe the coffee from 2 days ago, because it seems like it's a little bit drier. The one I took out of the machine last night to reset is probably this one with a greater quantity of moisture content. Yep. And it's something I like to do sometimes. I like to sprinkle in a little bit of my worm chow to try to make the coffee a little bit more interesting. Not that coffee is uninteresting to the worms, because I don't even know exactly what happens. I mean, it does seem like they do away with it quite readily in all my feedings, because I'm constantly adding worm chow to my worm bins, and coffee, sorry, and it does seem to all go away. And then similarly, I'm sprinkling in some grit. And the grit is something that the worms utilize to break down their foods down in their gizzards after they've consumed the food. That's pretty much going to make up their feeding here. So I think we're in a position to begin backfilling the feeding areas. And I guess I'm going to do a little bit of tilling on the outer edges, perhaps only because the outer edges are a little bit dry, where the plastic coverings didn't manage to prevent moisture from leaving through evaporation. So I kind of like the idea of blending in stuff that has been sitting out on the surface and drying, to give that stuff a fair chance at breaking down, rather than just allowing it to just remain dry and just sit there. And then I think we'll just continue across, trying to keep to that idea that we're working on a single large bin. Here maybe the plastic covering was a little bit more thorough, because here I see less material that seems to have dried on the surface, although over here I could see there is a little bit that seems like it could benefit from getting submerged into the more damp sections of the bin down low. So let's just keep at that over here to help this stuff get submerged down low, and then we'll be done. Very nice. I like to find worms all over the bin, you know. It's like fairly, I don't know, obvious that down where you were last feeding, you're gonna probably see worms hanging out, so that's not too surprising or too unexpected. But sometimes out in the outer reaches of the bin, where maybe things are not quite as damp, maybe it's so dry already that the worms just can't even go there. Not that they don't want to go there, it's just that they can't, you know. They need moisture content in the material that they're inhabiting so that they can breathe, otherwise they can't even venture into that stuff. So it is kind of a good validation that the system's in good shape when you can kind of browse around through the whole bin and find worms everywhere. And if you don't find worms there, you need to start questioning why. And chances are, you know, it's not definitely 100% confirmation that it's a lack of moisture, but it could be the reason. So if that were the case, I'd be prepared to supplement the moisture in these bins a little bit. But luckily during the summertime, that's usually not necessary. In fact, I'm usually dealing with quite the opposite, that the moisture just stays in the bin, has a tendency to not want to evaporate whatsoever due to the existing moisture content in the humid air. And then I start to feel like, hey, you know, maybe it's time to remove the plastic coverings and give these systems a little bit more airflow to hopefully let the moisture content in the systems remain a little bit more manageable and not let things get all muddy and nasty. So that's our feeding now for these 88-day-old African nightcrawler worm bins. Doing quite nicely. I believe that was my impression last time too when we checked in, that I think I just felt like these systems are doing quite good. Worms look healthy. They're doing away with the foods that we gave them from the last check-in. Oh, look at this. We had a little guy hanging out on the plastic, so I'm going to return him to his home with all of his friends and neighbors and family. and let him get back to work. So that's our check-in with the African night crawlers. I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that because that's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.